Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Autodesk webinar. My name is Hagen Delos. I will be hosting today briefly. I work here at Autodesk as a community manager, but we are actually here with Outleft Productions today. They'll be discussing their variety of workflows using Maya and its powerful tools. I wanted to turn it over to Darko and Richard for a little bit more info about their project Scrap Metal. Darko, Richard?
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks Hagen for the introduction and everyone at Autodesk for having us on this webinar. So this is about how to build a futuristic city from the ground up in Maya. So it's with Darko Mitev and myself, Richard Keane. So I'm the owner of Outleft Productions. It's an award-winning boutique production company based in Dublin in Ireland. I've been working in the industry for over 20 years now as a writer, director and producer, and work in both animation and live action. I worked at several high-profile animation studios over the years and worked on lots of Annie, BAFTA, Emmy award-winning productions. But presenting with me today is Darko Mitev, and we first met years ago when we worked together in Brown Bag Films, and we've been developing projects ever since. And over these years, we've delighted to showcase our latest collaboration, which is the short film called Scrap Metal, which we'll see today. So Scrap Metal was created with the support of Animation Ireland and Screen Ireland through their Animation Innovation and Immersive Development Fund. So we'll start off with showing you a teaser trailer for the short film. So I hope you enjoy. Cool. So hopefully that whetted your appetite and you're excited to hear more. So I'll hand you over to Darko Mitev now, who will tell you more about the project and how it came about.
Hey everybody, thanks Richie. Everybody, my name is Darko Mitev and I'm a CG generalist. And I've been in this industry for more than 13 years now. And I'm acting as a supervisor and an art director on the project Scrap Metal. And Scrap Metal basically began it began around 2016 actually. It all began with a small design exercise that I wanted to kind of push my abilities as a concept artist, because I've been doing a lot of modeling and a lot of look development and stuff like that, and I really wanted to try and explore my own designs. And I've been very familiar in the past with creative writing. I won actually a couple of awards about creative writing. So I was like, well, why don't I start with what I know? And I basically wrote a little bit of a backstory for a ancient place that I wanted to design, and I explored a little bit of history and what kind of technology where in the history they would exist, and I started creating, and it was a lot of fun. I actually really enjoyed the process. It was a little bit of creative writing, a bit of world building, and then a lot of 3D and concepting. So at the end of the project, I actually had a beautiful piece, which I was really proud of, and it actually attracted attention online a little bit, which kind of gave me, it kind of gave me the drive to try and do a little bit more. So after that, I created a few more pieces in this world, and because I already had established a baseline for how the world is going to look like, instead of creating a new concept and a brand new idea, I decided for every other render that I'm going to do, they'll basically exist in the same universe, and I'll just try to explore different civilizations, different cultures, and that kind of led into creating different characters as well, because I wanted to try and see if I can take some common tropes which are in the world of you know, fantasy and sci-fi, and I wanted to see if I can flip them and create you know, something that we call like familiar but different, you know, so something that is um like well known to the audience, but it has an interesting twist. So after exploring a bunch of fantasy projects, I wanted to try and do something a little bit more sci-fi, and a little bit of an experiment, so to speak. And this kind of coincided with a few different things. One, I was asked to teach an environment class in the company that I was working at the time. And second, Halloween was approaching, so I wanted to be something with thematical, so it would be interesting for people. So I created this environment, which is called The Experiment, ironically, and which kind of served as, you know, a jumping point between the sci-fi and the fantasy age, or the sci-fi era, so to speak. So basically what I did was I wanted to create like a gap in history where an event happened and now we pick up you know, a couple thousand years after we left off with the old age, and now we want to see like how the world developed and progressed. And I was really inspired by retro futurism as an art style. So I really like the nice oval soft shapes in a sci-fi design, which kind of lends itself very nicely to the retrofuturism art movement. And I also wanted to combine like some brutalist architecture and some of the um yeah, some of the retrofuturism, to see if I can create something unique. So this was the very first project that I did in this new sci-fi era, so to speak. But then as I was developing the story more and more, it kind of grew and became, you know, like it became like it started from a very simple idea of I want to become better at concept art, and it kind of grew into its own entity, its own project, which I, you know, didn't really count on. And I really wanted to create something that would be like a baseline, something that would establish the look and the feel of the project for all the future artworks that I plan on doing. So yeah, so this is basically how the Oris City, as it's internally called in our production, came about. So basically, yeah, this is going to be the baseline, and this is going to be the quality benchmark, the anything basically that is needed to kind of establish what we're going to be doing from here on out.
And yeah, when I saw this image that Darko had posted online, I was like going, you know, what are you doing with this? This is an amazing city. We have to do something with this. And I said, could I, you know, write a story in where it's set and, you know, in the stunning world that he created? And he told me about the backstory that he created. So I tried to incorporate those elements in to the script, and that's how Scrap Metal was born.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
I've got to ask, actually, Darko, you had
Yeah.
some really awesome high fantasy concepts in your previous work. Can we expect some mishmash of that, like maybe like sci-fi meets fantasy stuff in scrap metal, or is that too spoilery?
Not in scrap metal, but there, like after scrap metal is finished and we continue to develop this world, we definitely want to explore that as an option, because to me that's very intriguing idea of having ancient ruins, so to speak, or ancient monuments coexisting in a sci-fi world. So scrap metal is a little bit more self-contained story, and it happens in a small section of the city. So the city that we built, that we imagined and designed, is actually quite large. And the scrap metal is basically like literally one street from top to bottom. So it's like a vertical slice of how the world might and will look like in the future. But at the moment, yeah, we're focusing only on this thing because such a large scope to try to develop all at once.
And yeah,
I
because
love
it was
that.
Yeah, it was such a we had lots and lots of conversations about this because there was this scenario of like going, this is a new IP to people, so we sort of didn't want to confuse people. We had lots of different races and stuff. We have our lead
Yeah,
protagonist is a like we'll call her a human, and we were like going, if you throw in elves and all these other characters, it might just get too confusing. Who is this? Because it was the main story is the human versus robot and
yeah.
sort of versus AI. So that's the sort of the through line. So if we threw anything else, it might just get confusing. So there's definitely potential there, but for the short, we tried to make it nice and simple.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I really like that compartmentalized thinking way of thinking to tell a story. That's so cool.
Yeah, thank you. So the inspiration for this thing was very simple. So the story, I really wanted to build a city that is multi-level, like that's in the actual story that I wrote, but I wasn't really sure how I wanted to look like, and I was looking for references, and this very interesting reference from Japan kind of popped up on my radar, and the whole thing was that kind of drove me to get the look that I ended up with was the reflection in the water, funny enough, in this image. Because when I saw the building kind of reflecting down and it looked like the city continues all the way down, this is where I knew I wanted to explore this as an option and see if that's something that can work for us. Another thing in this reference is everything is very cramped and very minimal. You have this uh, the concrete material kind of dominates in this image, which again ties into the brutalist architecture that I wanted to explore for this project. So yeah, this was the main inspiration which we started with. And then from there, we started gathering a whole bunch of references from movies, from real life, from artists that I like their work, and even going down to technical details of like blueprints of windows and doors and elevators and everything in between to kind of like really get my head into the space of I'm designing a city. Everything that I put in there needs to have a purpose. It's not just there to make things look pretty. It needs to have a purpose, especially when you're designing this kind of a, a bare bones, so to speak, brutalist feel to the city. It's very important that every object that you put in there has a very specific reason why it's there. So if we look at some of the reference that I've decided to use, you can see that pretty much every reference has a place somewhere in this artwork. And that was very intentional because when you have such a very large reference board like the one that I've collected, it can get very overwhelming and confusing, and you might start bouncing around and try to design everything and you end up with nothing at the end. So it was very important to really narrow down my references only to the essential and have a second reference board, which is very necessary for the creative process. The other one is great for inspiration, for coming up with ideas, but when it comes to actually designing and modeling, I really wanted to focus my my efforts.
But actually, and Darko does go into a lot of detail in this. You don't even see, but there's elements of where he's designed his own type of screw heads, and there's plastic
Yeah.
inside the window doors. Because I would suggest people not to go into so much detail, but he loves it so much. It's amazing. It's you definitely see the quality of work when it comes out. So it's worth it in the end, but not production friendly sometimes.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of goes like the artist in me wants to model and detail everything out because I nerd out over details and things like that. But when it comes to the grand scheme of things, people rarely gonna notice any of this. So just to kind of give you an idea of how the whole city began, it was literally from scratch. I did not use any kit bash elements from online libraries and things like that, because the whole point of this was me trying to design something. So if I were to use third-party assets, then you're not really designing, you're just composing a scene, which is a different skill and a different, a different goal, basically. My goal was, try to design something that is relatable. It feels that it could exist, but also it has, a design element to it. Because a lot of the times the real world can be very bleak especially when you're just looking at like an alleyway. There's nothing really appealing in that. But as a designer, that's my job, to try to get something that is really simple and something that exists and is like a mundane to us. We don't even pay attention when we walk by some of these alleyways, and then try to work with lighting, with composition, with adding story elements that will basically try to try to make a piece of art out of an ordinary subject or object. So to kind of speak a little bit about how the blocking was done, as you can see, I'm not really paying attention to making my models feel perfect. The biggest thing for me in this stage is scale and feeling. Does this evokes the wonder that I want in my audience? Is it like is the street wide enough? So it's a little bit more technical. It's a little bit more grounded. And after this stage is complete, I actually go and I start detail out and design and try to think about all of these elements. As you can see, I was following the reference very close at the beginning, and the sidewalk was barely able to fit a human, but I kind of changed my mind a little bit on that, because at the end of the day, this needs to be a functional city. And if you're a citizen of this city living so high up, and you have such a high likelihood of falling down into what I call the undercity, you need to have some kind of safety measures. So like, as you can see, I'm progressively starting to add a lot more details. And as my thought process kind of develops, I advance the design. And I don't do only the design in my modeling. The blocking is actually where I do a lot of the design work, because like I said, the design is based on necessity, and the blocking is the stage where you kind of go and facilitate that. So I really wanted to try to push the block out, and I kind of developed this. I kind of stole this term from the animators. They have blocking and blocking plus. So that's I kind of stole their term a little bit, and I call this a blocking plus, because if you were to do like a previous or anything like that, some of the buildings that I ended up with turned out a little bit more detailed for a block out. But for me, it was important because, like I said, design and blocking and modeling was all kind of converging and kind of melding a little bit. So then from there, going into modeling, you can see this is like where I left off in my block out. And then if we look at how the whole world progressed, you can see everything still kind of stays there. Some objects have shifted, some got more detailed. I decided to do some negative space and play with shadows and light. And but the overall feeling, the overall structure of the city basically stayed as it was in the blocking. I didn't keep the bridge close because I really wanted to get the feeling of the city going down, and just to kind of feel the scale and the intensity of this whole world. So everything is still there, but it's just like shifted and refined, so it works from this camera point of view. The way I like to think about this is as if it's an establishing shot of a film. So when you see this, my job with this artwork was to basically instantly convey like geographic location, mood, scale, and type of environment, like type of life you could expect in this environment. So one thing I was really I kind of discovered while I was doing this is adding lighting while you model is super important. And because I was using V-Ray, and this was done with V-Ray 5, in the V-Ray 5 frame buffer, they introduced the compositing tab, where if you set your render layers or your AOVs, you can actually do a simple compositing of your Z depth and kind of superimpose it over your grayscale render to kind of mimic the fog or the mist you're going to see in the final render. And this really helped me like guide and focus my attention to basically how much detail I need in the background, because not everything that you model needs to be to what we call a hero standard. The further the object go from the camera, usually they can get a little bit less detailed and things like that. So this process really helped me kind of guide my modeling and my design. So with that done, it was time to make a plan. So I knew that detailing every single building is going to take forever. So I was like, all right, I need to have basically foreground, midground, and background. Now, in real production, background is usually going to be matte paint unless the camera goes and see that. But because I just love doing everything in 3D, I didn't actually do any matte paint for this. So everything is 3D, but the model goes progressively simple to the point where you go up to the buildings in the far back, and they're almost like a game res. They're not even subdivided. So that's kind of like one of the approaches I took for this. So I've split up the whole city into 12 buildings. I wanted to have certain amount of props. I think we ended up in total with like 50 or 54, something like that, props. And they can vary from a simple wrench to a car to a robot to I kind of put all of them in the same bracket because if they need to be modeled, I consider them props. So if you take a look at some of the buildings, you're going to notice that some buildings don't have the upper floors modeled. And the reason for that is that's not going to be seen from the camera point of view. So the way I designed a lot of these buildings they are modular. And what that means that if I take a single slice of or a single floor, I can replicate that and basically create the look of the building. So the idea was that to optimize my render time, I only duplicate as many floors as I need for my camera to basically work. And then I leave the rest of the building in for casting shadows and reflections, but I don't necessarily need all the details that I would usually get from a like a real building, which goes all the way up. So just to kind of showcase some of the prop work that was done, this guy on the left, the robot, is technically a character, but because he's such a hard surface asset, I kind of considered him into the prop for this project particularly. Then when we moved to the production of the film, he became a character and he received a lot more love and was detailed and all these things. But for the purposes of this image and the concept of the city, he was considered a prop. And showcasing some of the modeling approach, I've used a combination of polygonal modeling and subdivision modeling. When I start modeling, I usually don't pay attention to topology that much for hard surface assets. I like to get my shapes, my proportions, and the details in, and then I go in and I tweak and I optimize as I need later on. So like I said, I've gathered a bunch of references. So now I'm just importing them as image planes in Maya and just using them as a guide. As you can see, I'm not snapping anything to a specific image plane. I'm not trying to copy any of the real world designs. I'm kind of inspired by them, but I want to put my own twist. I want to, try to design my own air conditioner. Hell, because you start getting into this conversation of like, how does a dumpster or an air conditioner looks like in my world? How does a phone booth look in my world? Do they even have that? What's the technology behind that? It kind of drives the whole it kind of drives the whole design process. So yeah, just one more like a little process video of how one of the dumpsters was created. And like, yeah, because I had so much backstory already written, this was almost like cheating because I already had so much material to kind of pull from that when it came to designing these, I actually was trying to restrict myself not to put too many details and to create too many versions of a same object because when you start doing that, obviously you'll never finish a project. But yeah, so that was like one of the assets. And again, just reiterating, trying not to model, like I do over model, but as a production rule, try not to over model things that are not going to be seen by the camera, because just it's a waste of resources for your rendering.
And
And
with that,
then
just to say, when Darko's as the overmodels, the fact that is like he was doing this, this was a personal project, so he wanted to learn stuff. So this is absolutely
yeah,
fine. So you're happy to do that, and on your own time, 100% do that. Obviously, in production, you're not going to do that. But this was, when I say that, he did all the detail, but that was him learning that stuff. So on your own
yeah.
time, do that. And this was a great experiment. So he learned out that, and like all the best designers in the world, like he is the element of, you know, what the backstory is of every prop you're doing, what's the functionality of it, what's the purpose of it, and how does it work with characters and all that. So it's a great thing to keep in mind as you're working away.
Yeah, definitely. And then, the dreaded process of UVing began. As you all know, it takes a long time to UV, especially these huge assets. Like this one took me about a day, maybe to kind of fully UV and organize everything, making sure the textile density is correct between every UDIM, and then separating the separate UDIMs by material, so I have easier time texturing. And then I use Substance Painter as my package of choice for this. But like you can use literally anything. There's like so many applications today. But just kind of breaking down the process a little bit, usually you start with what the object is made of. In this case, it's a metal, right? So you start with a base metal. What kind of a metal is? Is it steel? Is it titanium? Is it aluminum? Because that kind of um, informs your decisions of like how many dents and how many scratches you're gonna get, because different metals have different softness and react differently to damage and wear. And then layering the different paints and the different weathering, that might be like trying to think like how the rust will collect in what areas, what kind of, like, do we have birds? Are we gonna have bird poop on the buildings? Those things really like sound very mundane, but they really add up to the final look of a building. In this city, it was very moisty kind of environment, so I've added a lot of mold to some of the paint, just to kind of showcase that these buildings have been around for a while, and even they've been repainted over and over again. Some of the mold and the grime is kind of baked into the facade at this point. So that was kind of the overall thought process behind the texturing. Now, the look dev, when you do everything with textures, is super simple. You have your main material, you load up your maps, you connect, and everything just works because you've already calibrated and figured it out in your texturing package of choice. You do the lighting and magic happens. It looks great. Now, the problem with that is when you have so many props and so many objects to do, you quickly realize if it took you 4 months to model everything, it's going to take you another 4 months to texture it. So I wanted to kind of speed this whole process up, and I was like, okay, we need to go procedural, and we need to figure out a quicker way of doing it. So if I bring up Maya now, we can see a graph network of one of the buildings that I created with procedural tools. So I'm just going to quickly make a little bit more room. So if I bring up the render view, this is building 3, if you remember from that breakdown image. So this is how the whole building was textured, and I've already pre-rendered this so we don't have to wait. But basically, we have the very same thing we just saw in Substance Painter, is just laid down with it's laid down in a node-based approach, right? So if you think about the base metal, I even called it base metal, so I'm clear of what I'm doing, right? So I have every map that I'm adding is basically a channel that you would have in Substance Painter. So you have your color, you have your roughness, and you have your normal or your height map. And I'm using tileable textures or noises or anything in between to kind of drive the look of this. And the big thing is I'm using the triplanar node to skip the UV process, because the UV process is something that takes a long time, like I mentioned. So using this triplanar method, it basically projects the texture from 3 sides, and you get basically texture without any UVs. And then I'm using a lot of remap nodes. Basically, if you think about these as color correction, so this would be your hue saturation. It can be anything from a ramp to contrast. Anything in between can be done with these nodes. So this material by itself, if you render it, you get this look. So nothing too exciting at the moment. You have a little bit of a breakup. You have, some metalness going on because, again, it's a metallic object. And then you create your second layer, which is your paint. And basically everything working with the same approach. You have all of these textures combined into the base color, and you have a roughness map, and you have just a simple noise going into the bump map. So if we look at that, we get something like this. Again, on its own, nothing really special, but once you start combining them, so now I have a mask and a blend layer. So I'm taking those two and I'm combining them. And I'm adding a third layer for the scratches, and again, a mask for that. So you can see I'm slowly starting to build all of these layers. So all of them combined into a blend shader, I'm starting to get something that looks interesting. I get the shiny layer that I just showed you kind of poking through with that grungy mask. And then I have some of the bigger patches that are being taken from some of the layers below. And then I just keep layering things up. I have my rust, and I'm using an ambient occlusion as a mask. And just to kind of showcase how that works is you have your blend material, which I called it chip metal. And inside of that blend material, you have multiple materials connecting. So if I go to coat materials, you're going to see I have a coat and I have a blending amount. And this blending amount is where you can plug in your mask. So I'm using the ambient occlusion in this case, the V-Ray ambient occlusion, which has a built-in leaking feature. So if I take this and I crank up the leaking features, now I start to get these streaks of rust coming in. And then I just created a bunch of noise, two different noises combining together to create this basically almost like a marble pattern, right? And I'm using another leaking mask to add some wear and some some weathering happening on the building. So if you look at the whole thing combined, all these little steps kind of pile up and they create this appealing looking result at the end. Now, the really good thing about this is once you completed one material, you basically textured all of your buildings, because all I did for the rest of the buildings is duplicate this entire network and change the inputs from metal to brick or to concrete, and then just tweak the parameters. If I don't need a scratch, I just disable that layer. And it's very versatile and very quick way of iterating. And if you play that making of video again, you're gonna see some of the buildings go through multiple iterations until I get to the final result. And that's because it was so quick to basically change. What if it's this metal? No, what if it's that metal? What if it's brick? So I keep iterating until I find something that really works with the composition and the rest of the the world that I'm building. Now, something to kind of mention is I use these 3D projection nodes. So if I bring Maya over, you can see all these projection boxes pretty much everywhere. And this is because those leaking masks that you saw, they don't project using a triplanar. they project using this 3D texture node. And if you do that, you can position these anywhere you want, and you can get leaking in very specific areas, almost as if you've painted them by hand. So that's the very fast nature of iterating in this way. So if we kind of skip through some of these slides because we've demoed them already, then you arrive at the final shading network. Then if you render that, you end up with this. So you can see a lot of detail. It can hold up in close-ups. This image was rendered at 10K resolution. So, even at 10K, it holds very well. Now, it was all done, and I had to do lighting. And this is where things started to go really crazy with the render times, because massive city requires massive amount of lights, because every building needs its own lighting to kind of showcase. Now you can do this a couple of ways. You can put emissive shaders on windows and stuff like that, try to fake that. And in some cases I did that as well, but I really wanted to capture the feeling that the light is inside the apartment and not stuck on the window. And because this was a concept art, I didn't really care about optimizing it just yet, because at this point, scrap metal was not even in the conversation. This was basically me trying to do beautiful art, right? So every building, like what I did is I extracted every building into a separate Maya file, because divide and conquer, easier to process, easier to manage, easier to look dev, and easier to light. So what I did was I lit every building in a separate Maya file using the dome light, which is basically the HDRI, the main lighting, and then some of these sunlights. And then I placed lights inside of every apartment or next to a neon sign or anything in that regard where I need specific lighting. And then when I reference that building back into the main set, I get all the lights together. So at the end, we ended up at 221 lights. And one thing is very interesting about this is because I wanted to showcase the damp and moist look of the whole environment, instead of creating one directional light serving as my sunlight, I created multiple area lights and positioned them to shine from the same direction but at different places. Basically, painting with light, so to speak. So I positioned all the lights to kind of hit very specific buildings where I want my audience to look at. And that kind of gave the illusion that the light is coming through the clouds and there are gaps into the clouds. So you see pockets of light here and there, but not one giant stream of light the way you would see in a bright sunny day. And then when everything was done, I set my render, and after I can't remember exactly, but I think it was like a full night and day to render the whole thing in 10K resolution. I did the compositing in Nuke. The compositing was super simple. I didn't do any special things. I did a bunch of glow nodes for very specific neon signs and lights, just to kind of enhance that. And I've added a couple of specular layers on top of some of the metallic objects to kind of bring them up a bit, but that was pretty much it. And then at the end, a Z depth and a little bit of color correction, and we got this. So if you break down all the layers in comp, this is how they look like. As you can see, layering every pass just adds a little bit more and a little bit more, and the fog really kind of binds everything together, unifies it, and then the final color correction is what makes it stand out. And then we started discussing the short film.
So yeah, so when we saw this set, we sort of we knew it needed to be slightly updated. You'll see here some of the logos and stuff like that was done, and this will help tell our story. But also for the film, we didn't want to just open on this cool image, though it was awesome, but it was like we need to have a build up to it. So we also didn't want to just have credits at the start, just a simple text thing. So we were like, oh, can we combine the two? So we sort of figured out a way to integrate it from a natural beginning, where we can sort of have in where we can have the title cards integrated into the set in a natural way and then flow up. So we came into this beautiful vista at the end. So we can now show you the opening sequence. And that's all you get to see for now. So yeah, so if you want to get your phones out with the QR code, we got some additional material so you can check online. You can see Darker's work, but also we've got some free stuff that we can give away for as a thank you for watching this awesome presentation. We have the robot, one of the robots that you'll see is a sort of background character, so that's for free. It's fully textured and shaded, sort of production ready to go. We also have a kit bash that Darko's created, so props that are reused for this short. So again, click on the link, that's all free, so free to use. We love to see what you come up with using these assets, and please share them with us. And yeah, so thank you so much for your time and really appreciate it.
Wow. This is fantastic. And I know I have so many questions, but I don't want to monopolize everybody's time. And I want it to be open format. So if folks want to drop their questions in the Q&A, I do have a few questions, and I will kick off the Q&A because I don't see any in the chat yet, in the question and answer chat yet. So Darko, when you were talking about Z depth, I was actually really interested. Was that pass? Is that like are you doing that only in the blocking and blocking plus stages, or do you have to re-render all of that after you do, your highly detailed pass and everything?
That's actually a really good question. And Z-depth is something that the renderer, any renderer, can generate for you. So all you need to do basically is you go to your render settings. Actually, I can open up Maya and kind of demo that real quick. So basically what you do is you go to your render settings, and you set up the minimum and the maximum distance you want your passes to be generated by. So this is in the render elements. If you can see, I have a Z-depth pass over here. So the way this works is you have your attributes and you have your whites and your black and your minimum and your maximum depth. And this is what calculates the gradient, which is, going further from the camera becomes, goes from black to white, or you can flip it. And this is useful, like I said, for modeling, but it's even more useful at the very end because you render out your fog, which is the volumetric fog, and this is part of the look. But then you can also take your Z-depth and multiply it, or not multiply it, actually add it, like screen it, plus it on top of your fog pass in Nuke, or After Effects or any comp package, and you get to enhance the fog. You can even use the Z-depth as a color correction tool. Let's say you want your city to be bluish close to camera and go more warm as it goes towards the distance. Well, you can use the Z-depth pass as a mask in your color correction. So if you have like a blue to orange gradient, you can use the Z-depth into the mask of that so that you get different colors throughout the depth. And this even works if you have a camera movement because it's a volumetric pass.
So, okay, interesting. So how does that interact with like an AO pass? I know that you were doing some AO stuff locally in the textures. Is that like is your AO pass, ambient occlusion pass, baked in to the textures, and then you're doing the Z depth on with the camera, right?
Yes, so the AO is basically your contact shadows, right? So AO is I have an extra pass. I don't know if I have it here, but usually I don't think I have it in this particular pass, but usually what I have is you can add an extra texture and you can call that ambient occlusion, and then that's going to calculate ambient occlusion for the entire scene. And that basically gives you the contact point between two objects, and you kind of layer that in. So that's why we break down the compositing. So what we do is we take all of the passes and we break down the beauty layer to its main components. So I take my color, my diffuse pass, and then I layer my ambient occlusion, which basically kind of gives me a bit more shadow. So I don't have the AO painted, I have it calculated by the render engine. So I multiply that over my diffuse pass, and then I start layering my global illumination, my lighting, all of the reflections and specular. And then at the very end of that, I add my actual volumetric fog and my Z-depth. The Z-depth is basically the very last pass I add in the chain of all the compositing passes that I use, because the Z-depth is basically the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is something that I add at the very end.
Okay. Well, we got a couple questions in the chat. So Ayaz is wondering, the production workflow is incredible. Can these workflows be applicable in real-time production?
To an extent, yes. What you would do differently is if you look at this building, for example, this is super high density because it's close to camera. It's rendered to be subdivided at render time. So a lot of these assets, for example, they were modeled so that they would work close to camera, and they are specifically made for animation/film production. You can use very similar workflow with your gaming engine of choice. Let's say if you want to do something real time. So you can use Maya in combination with Unreal, for example, and you can model everything and you can export. And you basically need to pay attention to the density of your topology, so you don't over model or you don't add density so that it will run smoothly in virtual production. Now, usually virtual production it's much closer to gaming rather than pre-rendered because it needs to run at least 24 frames a second, oftentimes double than that. And then well, basically what you want is the most optimized models you can possibly have. So same principles do apply. The way we texture it, the way we do that apply, but the procedural nature of shading it using V-Ray, for example, or Arnold or any render engine, that is going to be different. You would have to texture everything separately. So yeah, that's like I said, it kind of applies, but there's some very big differences between the two workflows.
Cool. Christian has some kind words. Texturing the buildings, every single one, at adding the lights, insight, and the detailed security features out of the city. It makes it really, really believable and real. And he thinks it's outstanding. I agree.
A little bit of trivia for you guys is when we started doing the film, all of this 2.5 kilometer long street had to be retextured and relit with Redshift, because the original render was done with V-Ray, but then for the film we decided to go with Redshift just for speed purposes, and I had to retexture, not retexture, well, technically retexture some of the procedural buildings, but I had to reshade and redo the look development of every single building and prop you see in here.
What he also
So
doesn't say that he also rebuilt all of this in Unreal as well. And
yes, actually, yes. That was the
but
very first test we did.
exactly. And that was where part of this development and innovation scheme we were doing, because it was seen, could we do this in Unreal? But actually it wasn't ready for that, particularly because of the materials that we're using, the reflective, the metal nature. So that's why we reverted back to trusty Maya. It was like, okay, this will definitely do. And that's why we said, okay, for the render, then for the production, let's do Redshift and Maya. And that's what made it possible for us to do.
Yeah, we technically did the whole set 3 times because we did it
A glutton for
in
punishment.
Unreal. So yeah, speaking of patience.
I mean, it really pays off. You both have put so much time and effort into this, and it really, really shows. It's a really neat project. We got 2 more questions.
Yep.
Marco Mazza is wondering, how do you see the impact of AI tools in your workflow? Now, keep in mind, before you answer this question, we have 1 more question, and we have about 5 minutes left.
Yes. So AI is not something that I currently use, just because as an artist, I like to keep my skills sharp and I like to develop them even more. Now, I believe AI can be useful, but the way it's currently implemented is not to my liking, should I say. Like I like AI to speed up my UV process, my GI calculations, my topology workflow. I don't want it to make the art for me, like the meme said online, I want AI to do my laundry, not to do my art. That's kind of like, I want to do the laundry of 3D, not the final product. So at the moment, I'm kind of staying away. I'm paying attention, but I'm kind of abstinent like at the moment.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and that's the general policy of the production company, is because we want to support artists and all that. And of course, we use AI a lot regarding Google Maps is AI, and there's a lot of those things. And this whole thing is to help production wherever possible, but it's not the help the artist wherever possible. But at the moment, we're not integrating into our system, and it's let the artist do their creative flow, because yes, AI is great for if you don't have much artistic ability to, if you want to create a pitch deck for a quick way, yeah, great. Everybody knows it's AI though, and it's sort of that open, okay, that's fine. But then you then can employ an actual artist to then do the proper work, because that's where the love and the attention will really shine through.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I'll go on record to say that Autodesk's standpoint is to empower artists and take care of those mundane tasks and automate those systems and not take away anything from the artist's hands.
Great to hear.
A lot of